Hey everybody, it's Daniel here from Mobile Syrup, and we are back with another review. This is the LG G2, used to be called the Optimus line, but LG got rid of that and just wanted to focus on its G line. So its mid-range and entry-level devices may have the Optimus moniker, but its high-end devices are just going to be called G. So we have the G2. Now this is a very interesting device. We took a look at this in New York earlier this year, but now we have the final production version. This is coming to Rogers, Bell, Telus, Videotron, Wind, and SaskTel for about $200 on a 2-year contract. Very high-end phone. This is a 5.2-inch 1080p display, Snapdragon 800 processor, quad-core, 2.26 gigahertz. This is the fastest Android device currently available on the market in Canada, so this is quite an achievement. It's got a 3,000 milliamp hour battery inside. It also has 32 gigs of internal storage, a 13 megapixel camera with flash and optical image stabilization, and of course these strange looking buttons on the back. Yes, these are volume and power buttons located on the back of the device. What they do is allow you to quickly access functions like turning on the device. You can see here when I powered it on, there's a little LED that wraps around it. You also have quick access to things like the camera and quick memo. So if I hold down the bottom volume button, you get right into the camera. And if I do the same thing for the top, you have a quick access to quick memo. So this is a way of utilizing the locations of these strange looking buttons for good. Now, inherently though, are these better placed than traditional volume buttons? Now obviously LG has a long road ahead of it to differentiate itself from Samsung, Apple, Sony, Motorola, HTC, Huawei, basically every other Android manufacturer on the market. Now, how do they do that well? These buttons do quite well at that. This is definitely going to be the phone with the buttons on the back, but are they better? That is the question. No, they are not. They're different, and they'll take some getting used to. Obviously, you can see here this is a big phone. It's a 5.2-inch display. It's not so big that you will really feel like it's a phablet, excuse my language, but it's big enough that your index finger will need to support it on the back, and that's why these buttons are here, because they're the natural place where your index finger goes. It did take some getting used to, I admit. I definitely smudged the camera a few times before kind of getting used to it, and I have a cheat sheet here. You can see this little ridge that LG has included. This is a metal raised ridge just east or west of the power button, and that will help you locate it when you are traveling horizontally across the back of the device. So once you are used to that, what do you have? Well, you have a very, very svelte device. It's about 9 millimeters thick. There are no buttons on the top, sides, or bottom. You can see here there's that micro USB port here. You have a bottom-facing speaker that's quite a bit lower than its competitors, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. And we also have some excellent, excellent sound quality from the headpiece. We had no issues with voice calls at all. And overall, this is a very nice and minimalist device. LG's done a great job with the hardware, except for one thing. It is a fingerprint magnet. You can see just from using it a few minutes, this thing is full of them. Now, what happens after a while is that the oils from your fingerprints make the plastic quite slippery. LG has succumbed to Samsung hyperglaze fever, so to speak, whereas Nokia and Motorola seem to have supplanted this problem with a matte polycarbonate build. This feels very, very plasticky, and while a little bit better, in my opinion, than Samsung's former builds, only because this does not have a removable back, so it wraps better around the hand, it still feels too slippery, and after a few hours I wanted a case. That being said, let's move on to the device. You tap on twice to turn it on. You can see that worked the second time. That's pretty accurate. It doesn't work all the time, but this feature is called knock on, and as long as you are very forceful with your knocks, it turns the device on and off. You can see this gorgeous lock screen, very, very full of animation, this phone, and the LG launcher is very, very full of cartoony type icons, the functionality of which, in my opinion, has a lot to be desired. Now, when you pull down that notification bar, half your screen is filled with stuff. Now, this stuff is not removable, and I repeat, you cannot remove any of these 4 lines. As well, take note of the fact that there are 2 cogs right next to each other. They do different things. This is specifically for sound, while this gets into the settings. LG really needs to work on their design. Samsung did this a couple years ago. They really improved their TouchWiz experience. This feels like TouchWiz circa 2012. That being said, this is a very, very fast device. We have a Snapdragon 800 processor in here. It's one of the fastest on the market. This supports LTE speeds of 150 megahertz on Rogers Max network. It also has 100 megabits on Bell and Telus, as well as AWS support for the new entrants. It is a very, very fast benchmarking device as well. You also have a 13 megapixel camera here, which is excellent and provides some very, very great photography capabilities. We have lots of modes here that most people won't use, but they're good to have anyway. Things like burst shot, night mode, intelligent auto, which basically is normal mode. I'm not sure exactly how it differentiates. We have dual camera, which uses the front and back. Have you ever seen that before? We have burst mode, as I said, and we also have something called shot and clear. I'm not sure where I've seen that before. Samsung coughs Samsung. Anyway, this takes a few notes from the Galaxy series, I will admit, but it does it quite well. The on-screen menu and back and home buttons have their own benefits as well. For example, you can scroll up to access Google Now. You also have the ability to use something called VoiceMate, which is better than S-Voice and in some ways Siri. Now, the reason it's better is because it is powered by Maluba. And where have we heard Maluba? We have heard Maluba on Mobile Syrup. They are a Waterloo-based startup that powers a lot of its own functions. This has an Android and a Windows Phone app, but it's a very, very powerful Do engine, as they call it. You can find restaurants, businesses, movie theaters, events, all powered by Maluba. You can use your voice as well as text for this. And because you have access to these Q-Slide apps, you can have the functionality wherever you go. So you can be scrolling through your phone and you can have access to this VoiceMate over here. As well, you have things like memo pads, which can be resized, and you can take a quick note, hello, and then go about your day. You can save it, and that's that. You can also change the translucency, so if you want access to the app while you're doing other things, that's possible too. Now, this doesn't have a lot of functionality because even though the 1080p display is very vivid, it doesn't actually make anything much smaller. So this is scaling on a mobile size as opposed to something like Windows, where if you resize a 1920 by 1080 display to 720p, for example, everything will get physically bigger. This just makes everything much sharper, but it keeps the scaling almost identical. Now, this 5.2-inch display is a marvel of technology. You can't see it on this video because my video camera is not very good, but the screen goes edge to edge, and it is absolutely stunning. The color gamut is beautiful. The saturation is fantastic. The brightness, the max brightness, is just outstanding. You also have this quick toggle here if you want to raise and lower the brightness for any particular reason. It also has auto brightness turned on by default. So these settings here are useful, but they just take up space, and I wish that you could get rid of them if need be. Now, if you have a small hand and you can't reach that top notification bar, there are some things you can do. For example, if we go to System Settings, you can actually change the layout of your navigation buttons, and this makes it very easy to say access things like the notification bar with a quick slider. So lots of customization options. You can theme the heck out of this phone. This is about as good as a custom ROM, but in official format. You also have optimizations for things like one-handed operation. You can do gestures like double tapping, which was called knock on. You can turn your phone over to silence it when an incoming call comes, to turn off an alarm. You can flip the phone to pause video. There's none of that eye tracking stuff that was really not useful on the Galaxy S4. So this takes it a bit more seriously. It also has something called guest mode, which, as you guessed, is meant for children and friends who you don't want to gain access to your vital porn stash, other stuff. And there's also something called slide aside, which is quite interesting, but not very useful. So what happens is, say I go into, no, I don't want you to go in there. Let's go into Quick Office. Okay, so I want to slide this aside. Okay, that's saved. So I used 3 fingers and I moved it aside, and then I'm going to go into this app, and I'm going to slide that aside, and then I'm going to go into Starbucks, and I'm going to slide that aside. Now what you have are 3 apps that are going to open next to each other, and then you can choose to restore them. Now what makes this better than the multitasking menu that you can just use to access your apps like normal? Well, nothing really. There's no difference other than it's just there, but it's interesting that it is there. It's interesting that LG is trying to differentiate itself, and as you can tell, it's actually quite fast. You just grab your 3 fingers and slide them across, and if you're done, you slide it away. The animations are smooth, the functionality is interesting, but it's just not very useful. So a lot of these applications are interesting, but they're just not very useful. That being said, this has a great all-round phone package. It sounds great, it looks great, it's fast, it's stable, and it's got some good software functionality as well. Talking about all-around package, this has one of the best battery lives of any phone we've ever used. I get 2 days of this, and maybe 36 hours if I'm using it a little bit more heavily, but mostly I can get 2 days from this. That's mostly thanks to the Snapdragon 800, but there is a few things going on in here, including video RAM that's actually being used by the display to cache some of the more static screens. So for example, this screen right here, nothing's changing on the display right now, so this is actually cached in a small amount of video RAM that's not using the battery because the screen is not being refreshed, and you won't notice it. It's not it's invisible to the user, but it's extremely useful. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now we're going to compare this quickly because I don't like disappointing, and I have a few treats for you. This is the Galaxy S4. You can see how similar they look from the front, but and from the back as well. But you can see the G2 is a little bit bigger. It also has smaller bezels on the screen. And we also have something brand new for you that we're going to show you, quite a bit of in the coming days. This is the Galaxy Note 3, and you can see this 5.7-inch full 1080p display. So we can take a look at that and compare. So I turn down the brightness on this. So let me turn up the brightness just a little bit. Let's turn up the brightness on here as well. Now, you may not be able to see that very well, but these are both very bright displays. On the right, we have an IPS LCD display. On the left, we have a Super AMOLED display. So you can see here, the G2 is a little bit smaller. Well, it's actually quite a bit smaller than the Note 3, but it's also a little bit more round. It's a little bit thinner, and it feels more like a phone, whereas the Note 3 feels much more like a tablet. So that is a quick preview of some of the stuff that we have coming up in the next few days. This has been a quite messy overview of the LG G2, so if you stuck around this long, thank you for putting up with my fingerprints, and please read the full review on mobilesyrup.com.